What's up guys, welcome to Talking Poodoo, a Star Wars show. Today I'm reviewing Star Wars Alphabet Squadron by Alexander Freed. This is about an Empire defector just after the events of Return of the Jedi. I think it's about 6 months after, something like that. Basically, Irika Kell, the defector, recruited by a New Republic intelligence officer to help form a squadron to take down a troublesome TIE fighter squadron that the Empire is using. So that's essentially what this whole book's about. It's about building this team, the team getting to learn each other, the team trying to take down this TIE fighter squadron. It's intended to be the first in a trilogy, but it's also a crossover with a comic book series. The comic book series actually looks at it from the Empire's perspective of this TIE fighter squadron, so that's interesting. I haven't read that yet. So what did I think of this book overall? I thought it was alright. It's a good start to this trilogy. I'm interested to see where the trilogy goes from here. I'll get into that a little bit later. But it's a good, well-written book overall. It tells an interesting story. But because it is the first in the trilogy, it does very much feel like it's establishing the characters, the locations, and the scenarios, and it feels like maybe they're keeping some stuff for the other two books. It feels like this is just things getting going. And because of that, this book can at times feel a little small scale. The fact that it is just a TIE fighter squadron feels like, oh, yeah, you haven't really got a huge villain here, have you? And it feels, hopefully, the sequels are a little more grander, a little more big, and a little more significant and important in terms of the larger Star Wars canon. But this, can't complain about this too much. So this is actually one of the longer Star Wars books in recent memory. It's over 400 pages, which isn't that long, I'll admit, but there are some pacing issues in here. I think there are huge chunks of this book which didn't need to be there. The book constantly feels like it's slowing things down unnecessarily. There are constant deviations from the main thread. The first half of the book, for example, is all about introducing the characters separately, and it takes a long time for the team to actually get together. They really could have done with trimming some of that stuff down and getting just to the point much quicker than what they did. And in relation to this, there's a side character who doesn't really link in with any of the other characters, who only appears in like 2 or 3 chapters in the whole book. Didn't need any of that stuff as far as I'm concerned, especially since that stuff seems to be building more towards the sequels. Maybe include some of that stuff in the sequel as flashbacks maybe, rather than in this book. Yeah, you could have easily trimmed some of that stuff out, in my opinion, and it would have made a much brisker, steadier paced book, and it wouldn't have slowed things down quite as much. One of the things I liked about this is that there are interesting locations and new worlds and environments in there. So in the start of the book, they go to this, what is essentially a camp made up of Empire defectors, and where they're being processed and examined by the New Republic. It's really interesting, pretty dark it seems, at least that's my vision and interpretation of it. So, interesting new locations. There's another place on an asteroid, I believe, and then there's a Jedi temple that's explored, which is very similar to like some place like Yavin or something, but it does a good job of coming up with these creative environments. The final place that it goes to, the name I'm forgetting off the top of my head right now, but the way that it describes it, where it's like clouds, which you've got to be careful because you shoot, then it'll all combust and explode. And yeah, not going into spoilers, but the ideas that I had in my head of the visual interpretation of this was quite impressive. Of course, it is just my visual interpretation of it. It could be completely wrong. Someone else could read this and see something completely different in their head. One of the most appealing things of this is that it is set after Return of the Jedi. It's pretty close after the Return of the Jedi as well, so it's not as far away as like the, what's it called, the Aftermath trilogy, but it fills that gap and it shows that the Empire is still around, it is still kicking. It also links into Star Wars Battlefront 2's campaign with Operation Cinder. It goes into that, it actually goes into that quite a bit here, because Operation Cinder in Battlefront 2 often felt like, oh, it's just the Empire doing something evil for the sake of being evil. This actually goes into that a bit more. It's like, why did they do Operation Cinder? What was the purpose of it? And maybe you get some answers, maybe you don't. But I like how it fleshes that storyline out a bit more. And what it does for the overall canon, I like that it's showing that there is still a war going on, that when the Emperor died, the war didn't just stop, it didn't end. The Empire is still very much a thing, it just lost its leader. It also does a good job of showing differing views on the war and expanding on the galaxy. So, yeah, when you're watching the films, the Empire are the bad guys. But there are people in this universe, in this galaxy, who actually like the Empire, like what they've done, and like the rule of the Empire, and feel like the rebels are just terrorists who are trying to take over. They feel very much like they're victims in this war. And I'm not talking just about like stormtroopers or whatever, I'm talking about like ground level, normal, average civilian people. So it's really interesting. It does a good job of diving into the different viewpoints of this war, and that there isn't quite such a thing as good or bad necessarily, until you get to like the top, and obviously Darth Vader and the Empire are clearly bad. But yeah, they don't know that. So one of the things this book does pretty well is that each of the characters has like hidden secrets and demons that they're dealing with, and by the end of the book you get some sort of resolution towards them. It does a good job of constantly seeding them in, exploring them elements. So Irika Kell, for example, the main character, has a big secret that only one other character seemingly knows about. And it does a good job of constantly teasing this, trying to figure out, keep you guessing as to what the secret is, that it's so big that it could destroy everything. Well, without going into spoilers, some of these reveals were a little underwhelming in the end, in my opinion. So yeah, I might go into that a little later in the spoiler section, but for the most part, it does a good job of building these secrets and keeps you interested in wanting to figure out what's going on. It makes a good job of being a guessing game, but the actual answers aren't always as satisfying as the build-up and the anticipation of it. So I've already started to do it, but let's go into a bit more detail about the characters. The main squadron itself, Irika Kell, Chaz, Naf Tencent, Will, and I'm even going to put in Ken Adan. They're all really interesting characters. So you're seeing behind me, that's what the characters look like. They've actually went in and done illustrations of these characters because they are in a big trilogy. I think it's a good idea to do that. However, I had very different visions in my head of what these characters looked like, and then I got this image on the internet, very different. So yeah, maybe that's a weakness of the writing, maybe that's a weakness on my part, not being all that imaginative, I don't know. But yeah, turns out they look very different from what I thought. But they are interesting characters, they've got good backstories. Irika Kell, being an Empire defector, has to deal with all the repercussions of that. Some people don't trust her, she doesn't exactly get along with the rebels or the New Republic here, because she doesn't quite know where she fits in this whole thing, because she did used to be for the Empire, and now she's the New Republic, kind of. So yeah, she's really interesting that way on. Ken Adan, I think, is actually the most interesting character in this. And he's not part of the main squadron itself. He's like the operative, the spy character who's instructing them and guiding them on this mission. I feel like the sequels have to delve into his character more because he is so mysterious, being a spy, obviously. But it feels like there's a lot of backstory to his character that we haven't yet seen. So I'm looking forward to see where that goes. The other characters, Naf, Will, and Chaz, I feel like I've learned enough about these characters. I don't know what's left to learn in the sequels. Maybe they're going to have a smaller part, maybe they'll have a bigger part. Hopefully there are some surprises with them characters still to come, because it feels like they've done a good job of wrapping up their storylines here. There are also some cameos and references to other Star Wars canonical events and characters, of course. So without going into spoilers, there are certain key characters who pop up in pretty significant roles in this book, and it links into past events pretty well. And of course, it's good just to see these characters are still around, they're still doing things in this timeline. So yeah, I'm going to spoilers about that in just a bit. One of the things I really like, and I've dived into this a little bit, is that there's no such thing as good or bad. So in the Empire, for example, the grunts, the stormtroopers, they think they're on the good side. They think that the New Republic are terrorists and they're a threat. Whereas the New Republic, some of them are wanting a more aggressive approach, some of them are wanting to be more political. They see each other as freedom fighters sometimes. At the end of the day, you've got spies and murderers and thieves and so on working alongside people who just want to make a good change to the galaxy. So it really blurs the line between what's good, what's bad, and it turns out no one's quite one or the other. They're somewhere in the middle. Maybe there are one or two who are much more good or bad than others. But it does a good job of exploring that, I think. But the biggest weakness of terms of the characters are the villains. The villains, again, I think you have to read the comic book to really get a grasp of who the villains are, to get their backstory. I think that's a bit of a weakness of this. The fact that you have to go to this other source just to find out who the villains are is a little frustrating, because really it should be in this book. And the villains do come across as stereotypical, snobby Empire characters, and yeah, it's a little disappointing. It also doesn't help that we see so little of the villains, because it is told primarily through the viewpoint of the lead protagonists of the book. There are like a few chapters from the villains' point of view here or there, but never diving in too much. And a lot of what we hear about and know about the villains is just one character, Erica Kell, primarily saying, oh, this character is such and such, this character is like this character is like that. But still, that's just her impression of these characters, these people. We don't actually know for sure what these people are like. So yeah, a little disappointing in that regard. So that's what I thought of Alphabet Squadron, without going into spoilers just yet. And I liked it. It's a good book. I think it is a good foundation for a trilogy, and hopefully the second and third book can get off to a good jumping point start. And I'm interested to see where this goes, because it is a very, this is one book, it does tell a story overall, but there are a couple of little threads here and there which are feeding into the sequels, which I'm assuming will start coming out next year. So yeah, I do recommend it. And if you've liked this, subscribe to my channel. I am going to go into spoilers in just a bit though, so don't go anywhere just yet. Give me a thumbs up as well. Most importantly, subscribe, like I said, and leave a comment and feedback down below. You can also go to Twitter and Instagram, follow me at _Grant Burton if you want. But now it's time for full spoilers. If you haven't read this book, go read it, come back, watch the rest of this. Or if you just don't care and you just want to know what's all the juicy spoiler bits, then you're in the right place, because full spoilers. So the big thing, I think, is that Erica Kell has a secret. And it's constantly hinted at throughout the book. Ken Dawn is the only person who knows this secret. And then, of course, towards the end of the book, we find out what it is. And it was a little underwhelming. The secret basically being she was part of the Empire, but all the time she was only part of the Empire so she could get the flight training so that she could then leave the Empire and join the rebels. Yeah, that doesn't quite make sense in my eyes. So the actual reveal, though, just, it didn't feel like it was that big a deal, to be honest. It didn't feel like it was an, oh, shocking moment. So, yeah. Disappointing, I think, is the best way to describe that element. And that element's going to feed into the sequels, the fact that he now has this information on her. So, yeah, hopefully they can touch on that a little bit in the sequels and make it a bit more of a significant, important thing and explain why it's such a big deal a bit more than what they have here. But here's a prediction I'm going to make because of this reveal, because Ken Dawn is the one with this information. I think Ken Dawn might end up being the main villain of this trilogy. He has this information, he is very mysterious, he is very secretive, he's a spy, so I think he's going to end up becoming the villain at the end of the day. He does already skirt the line between being a good guy and a bad guy. You're never sure where his true allegiance is, because he's kind of there, but he's not really working for the New Republic. He seems to be doing it all on his own terms, essentially. So it's interesting. He is the most interesting character in this book, I think, because so much of him is shrouded in secrecy, and because he is one of the darker, more mysterious characters. So I talked about how there are some characters and references to past Star Wars canon. Hera Syndulla, one of the main characters from Star Wars Rebels, is in this book. She has a pretty significant role in this book. It's not just a cameo, she keeps popping up here and there. The main characters are on her ship, and she's a general in this book. She's leading this team trying to get the remnants of the Empire, and her inclusion in here is pretty well done. It does dive into her past a little bit, showing where she explains some of the things she's been through, because obviously this team, this squadron, is somewhat similar in the fact that it is a team to what she was going through in Rebels. So her inclusion, yeah, doesn't feel forced in, it feels very natural, it feels important and significant, and I liked her inclusion quite a bit. There is one character who's part of this squadron who I haven't mentioned yet, and that's Kairos. So Kairos is the one wearing a helmet, and her character is really mysterious. So mysterious that she's just vague. And at one point we find out her backstory, kind of, but let me just say, this character doesn't speak. That's frustrating. It makes her very interesting, makes her very mysterious, but it means that everything she says and does has to be up for interpretation. And I always struggled while reading this book to figure out just what her point is. She's so mysterious, so unknowing, that she's just kind of there for the most part. Hopefully the sequels can really dive into her character a bit more. Her whole backstory thing, I didn't quite understand what the point was. I didn't quite get what she was trying to say and what she was trying to tell us. I think I got the gist of it, but I think there's a lot more detail to be had there, and there's a lot more to learn about this character. There's a key scene in this book where they visit a Jedi temple, and in this temple some weird stuff happens. They all have some sort of experience in this temple, as happens when you go to these Jedi temples in Star Wars. So a lot of the stuff here is ambiguous and a little on the vague side. Hopefully the sequels dive into that a bit more. Hopefully it explains what these characters' roles in the galaxy and in this story are a bit more. And yeah, again, this book, it just feels like it's constantly trying to set things up for what's happening later on. Hopefully what is happening later on in the second book, they can just hit the ground running and get straight to the point, because this is a lot of build-up in this book. Like I said, halfway through the book, that's when the characters actually meet each other and start to get to the point of what this book's about. It's a lot of build-up for a pretty small story, really. And of course, there's the character of Devon, who I've mentioned. Devon is the big thing that they're building up for in the sequels. Of course, it's revealed at the end that he's actually, was it Major Keyes, I think it is? I'm not sure if he's a major, can't remember. But Keyes, the problem is that spends so much time with this character, about 3 chapters in the whole book. It feels like a big divergence, a big distraction from what's actually going on, to set up this thing that's going to happen in the sequel. But this character's not that interesting. So it's diverging, it's distracting from the main storyline to focus on a character that's not interesting, who's going to be important later on. Again, this stuff I feel should have just been cut out of this book, put into the next book and used as backstory or flashbacks or something, and it would have been made this book a bit slimmer, a bit more streamlined and more focused. But yeah, hopefully the sequel will be better than this. I did like this though. I'm not at all saying this is a bad book. It's pretty good. So yeah, that's what I thought of Alphabet Squadron. I'm looking forward to the sequels. I'm also going to check out the comic book as soon as I get a chance to see another perspective on this story and see what the villains were up to and get a better understanding of the villains. So if you've liked this, subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, and of course leave a comments and feedback down below. Like I said, yada yada yada, Twitter and Instagram at _Grant Burton. Until next time, thanks for watching.